Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't worth your time, Mother. Those words, spoken by my own flesh and blood before the line went dead, should have shattered me. But you'd be surprised what stops hurting once your heart's already cracked before. Instead, sitting in my modest Portland apartment with a winning lottery ticket worth $287 million tucked inside my grandmother's Bible, I found myself smiling. My daughter Rebecca had just revealed her true nature, and she had no idea I'd been watching, waiting, testing. I'm Margaret Hayes, 74 years old, and I've spent the last 16 years playing the same lottery numbers every single week. Not because I believed in luck, but because I believed in routine. My husband Thomas's birthday, the day we got married, and the coordinates of the hospital room where our grandson Owen was born, latitude and longitude converted to lottery numbers. Call it superstition, call it foolishness, but those numbers kept Thomas alive in my daily routine long after the cancer took him. My neighbor Helen used to shake her head every Wednesday when she'd see me walking to Bernie's convenience store. "Margaret, you've got better chances of getting hit by a meteor while winning a hot dog eating contest," she'd say, adjusting her reading glasses. I'd just smile and keep walking, clutching my $2 like they were golden tickets. Because sometimes hope isn't about winning, it's about holding on to something that's yours. 3.5 weeks ago, everything changed. It was a Thursday evening. I remember because I'd just finished watching my cooking show when the lottery announcer's voice pulled me from my half-sleep. The first number, 21, then 37, then 42. My hands trembled so violently I could barely hold the ticket I'd retrieved from its spot between the pages of my cookbook. All 6 numbers. Perfect matches. $287 million. After the government took their share, I'd still walk away with just over $170 million. More money than existed in my wildest fantasies. More money than 10 generations of my family could spend. My first thought was to call Rebecca, then my son Michael, then precious Owen. I wanted to scream the news from my balcony, dance in the streets, share this impossible blessing with the people who mattered most. But something stopped me cold. But sometimes the people you love the most teach you the hardest truths. Maybe it was the conversation I'd overheard at Thanksgiving, when Rebecca told her brother that at least the old woman won't be a financial burden much longer. Maybe it was Michael's increasingly aggressive suggestions about me selling my apartment because it's too much space for one person, and think of what you could get for it. Or perhaps it was the way they'd both started talking about me in the third person, even when I was sitting right there. Whatever the reason, I decided to wait. For 3 weeks, I kept the secret locked tight. I met with 3 different lawyers, a financial advisor who came highly recommended, and an estate planner. I set up trusts, created investment portfolios, and planned my strategy with the precision of a chess grandmaster. And then I designed my test. The concept was elegantly simple. I would call each of my children, explain that I needed help covering the cost of my diabetes medication, which wasn't entirely a lie. Those insulin pens are criminally expensive, and observe their responses. If they truly loved me, if family meant anything beyond inheritance and obligation, they'd help their mother when she needed them most, even if they thought I had nothing to offer in return. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It warms this old heart to know where my words travel. Rebecca's response came first, and it cut deeper than any knife. When I called her that Tuesday afternoon, explaining that I was short on funds and needed help with my medication until my pension check arrived, she didn't even pretend to consider it. "Mother, I'm in the middle of a yoga class," she hissed into the phone, her voice dripping with annoyance. "Can't this wait? Honey, it's about my insulin. I'm running low and, for heaven's sake, you always have some crisis. What happened to budgeting? What happened to planning ahead?" Her words were sharp, calculated to wound. "I'm tired of these constant emergencies. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't worth your time, Mother." The line went dead. If you've ever heard your child hang up on you, you know silence can be louder than any scream. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at the phone, wondering if I'd actually given birth to this woman or if there'd been some terrible mix-up at the hospital. This was the same daughter I'd worked 3 jobs to support after her divorce. The same daughter whose car payments I'd secretly covered for 8 months when she was getting back on her feet. The same daughter who told me last Christmas that my homemade gifts were embarrassing compared to what other people received. But Michael's response somehow managed to be even worse. When I called him the next day with the same story, he interrupted me before I could finish my second sentence. And that's when I realized my son wasn't calling to help. He was calling to diagnose me. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation about your financial management," he said, using the patronizing tone he'd perfected since becoming an investment banker. This pattern of poor planning is exactly what Rebecca and I have been concerned about. "Michael, I just need a little help until—" "No, Mom, what you need is to face reality." His voice hardened. "Rebecca and I have discussed this extensively. You're 74 years old, living alone, clearly unable to manage your finances. It's time to consider assisted living facilities that handle everything: medications, meals, supervision." Supervision. Like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with scissors. "I'm not asking for much," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was fracturing. "Just enough to cover my insulin for 2 weeks. And next month it'll be something else. And the month after that. Mom, Rebecca and I have agreed we're implementing tough love. We're not enabling this behavior anymore." Enabling. The word tasted like poison. "I'm blocking your number for the next month. Don't try to call Rebecca either. She's doing the same. We love you, but sometimes love means letting people hit bottom so they can learn to stand on their own." The connection ended. I sat in that same kitchen where I'd bandaged Michael's scraped knees, where I'd helped him study for his MBA applications, where I'd cried with him when his first startup failed and then quietly loaned him $30,000 to try again. Money he'd never mentioned repaying. Money I'd never asked about because that's what mothers do. Now my own son was blocking me rather than spare a few $100s for the insulin that kept his mother alive. But I still had Owen. Sweet, genuine Owen, who'd somehow emerged from Rebecca's selfishness like a flower growing through concrete. At 22, he'd inherited his late grandfather's kindness instead of his mother's cruelty. He called me every Sunday just to chat. He remembered my birthday without Facebook notifications. He'd even learned to make my recipe for apple pie because he knew it reminded me of Thomas. Every family has that one person who still has a heart. For me, that was Owen. Surely Owen would pass this test. I dialed his number with shaking fingers, already rehearsing my explanation. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear music playing softly in the background, probably that jazz I'd introduced him to. "Grandma Maggie, perfect timing. I was just thinking about you." His voice was so warm, so genuinely happy that I almost called off the whole test, almost told him everything. Almost. "Owen, sweetheart, I hate to bother you, but I'm in a bit of trouble." I explained the medication situation, my voice cracking slightly, partly performance, partly the genuine emotion of everything I'd been through with his mother and uncle. There was a pause, and my heart began its slow descent into disappointment. Then, "How much do you need, Grandma? I've got about 600 in my checking account from my library job. I can Venmo it right now. And if you need more, I can pick up extra shifts. Are you okay? Do you need me to come visit?" "I can drive down this weekend." $600. Probably every cent he'd saved while working part-time and managing his graduate studies. He was offering me his entire safety net without a moment's hesitation, and he wanted to drive 7 hours just to check on me. "Oh, honey, I could never take your hard-earned money," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, dripping onto the kitchen table. "Grandma, you've never asked me for anything, ever. In my entire life, you've just given and given. If you need help now, I'm coming. No arguments. I'm already looking at my calendar." After we hung up, I sat in that kitchen for an hour, crying and laughing simultaneously. Owen had passed with flying colors, with honors, with every conceivable gold star. His mother and uncle had failed spectacularly. They were all about to learn a very expensive lesson about the value of kindness. And oh, what a lesson it turned out to be. That Saturday, I bought Owen a brand new slate blue Subaru Outback. The salesman probably thought I was senile when I paid cash, all $28,000 in a single transaction. But the look on Owen's face when I handed him the keys made every penny worth it. Rebecca arrived at my apartment on Sunday afternoon, probably for her monthly obligation visit. She pulled into the parking lot in her leased BMW, which I later discovered she was 3 months behind on, and her jaw literally dropped when she saw Owen washing the Subaru. "Whose car is that?" she demanded, climbing out of her vehicle like she was emerging from a spaceship. "Mine," Owen called out, dropping the sponge to rush over and hug me. His genuine affection was everything. "Grandma bought it for me. Can you believe it?" I watched Rebecca's face transform through a fascinating array of emotions: confusion, suspicion, calculation, and finally rage. Her perfectly highlighted hair didn't move an inch in the breeze, the magic of expensive salon products and hairspray that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Mother, we need to talk. Inside. Now." Michael arrived 10 minutes later. I texted him that we were having a family meeting, and his face went through the same emotional journey as his sister's when he spotted the Subaru. We gathered in my small living room, the same space where Rebecca and Michael had played with their toys 40 years ago, where Thomas had read them bedtime stories, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, and all the ordinary moments that supposedly built families. Rebecca perched on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid of catching poverty. "Where did you get the money for a car?" Michael demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Last week you were calling us begging for insulin money." "Was I begging?" I tilted my head, genuinely curious. "I thought I was asking my children for help with medication that keeps me alive. My mistake." That line, let's just say it landed like a grenade. "Don't play games, Mother." Rebecca's voice had that sharp edge that could cut glass. "How much did that car cost? 25? 30,000? Where did that money come from?" I settled into Thomas's old recliner, the leather cracked and comfortable, worn smooth by years of his presence. "Well, I decided to skip my insulin this month. Apparently buying cars for loving grandsons who actually care about me is more important than managing my blood sugar." Rebecca gasped dramatically. "Mother, that's insane. You can't stop taking your medication." "Oh, now you're concerned about my health. How thoughtful, how very touching." Michael was catching on. I could see it in his eyes, those same eyes that used to look at me with love instead of calculation. "This is crazy. Owen, get in here." My grandson appeared in the doorway, still beaming, still unaware of the trap closing around his mother and uncle. At 22, with his grandfather's gentle brown eyes and his late grandmother's auburn hair, he looked so much like Thomas that it sometimes hurt to look at him. "Owen, you can't accept this car," Michael said firmly. "Your grandmother has clearly lost her mind. She stopped taking her insulin to buy you a car. That's not love, that's mental illness." "Uncle Mike, what are you talking about?" Owen looked genuinely confused, his innocence a stark contrast to the ugliness unfolding around him. "Grandma's fine. We had a great conversation yesterday about my thesis, my job, everything. She's sharper than any of us." "Sweetheart, your grandmother called us last week begging for money," Rebecca interjected, her voice dripping with false concern. "Now suddenly she has $30,000 for a car. Something isn't right." Owen's expression shifted. This boy was brilliant, full scholarship to Reed College, now getting his master's in social work. He looked at his mother, then at his uncle, and I watched understanding bloom across his face like a time-lapse video of a flower opening. "You called them asking for help?" he asked me quietly. "I did. I told them I needed assistance with my medication." "And what did they say?" Michael and Rebecca suddenly found my carpet fascinating. You could have heard a pin drop. The silence stretched like taffy until Owen filled it, his voice soft with dawning realization. "They said no, didn't they? My own mother and uncle refused to help you with medicine you need to stay alive." "Now, Owen, it's not that simple," Michael started. "But when I offered to help," Owen interrupted, his voice filled with wonder, "you bought me a car instead." He turned to me, his eyes shining. "This whole thing was a test, wasn't it, Grandma?" Smart boy. But his mother and uncle are about to get much smarter, too. Rebecca's voice rose to a pitch that probably bothered dogs in neighboring apartments. "A test? Are you seriously telling me this was all some elaborate scheme?" I looked at this woman I'd carried for 9 months, this person I'd sacrificed everything for, with her designer clothes and her plastic surgery and her expensive handbag that cost more than some people's rent. "Scheme is such an ugly word, Rebecca." I prefer to think of it as a character assessment, a simple evaluation of what matters most to my children. Michael started packing, a habit from childhood that emerged whenever he was cornered. "This is manipulation, Mom, pure and simple manipulation." "Is it manipulation when someone shows you exactly who they are and you simply observe?" I kept my voice calm, almost clinical. "I made a simple request for help." Owen immediately offered everything he had and wanted to drive 7 hours to check on me. "You, Michael, lectured me about financial responsibility and blocked my number. Rebecca told me it wasn't worth her time. Those were your choices, not mine." "We had legitimate concerns," Michael protested. You've been struggling financially, making poor decisions. Have I? I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out the folder I'd spent 2 weeks preparing. Let's talk about poor financial decisions, shall we? Michael, remember when you invested in that cryptocurrency scheme 2 years ago? The one that lost $40,000 of your savings, who quietly covered your mortgage payments for 4 months while you recovered. Michael's face went pale as winter snow. And Rebecca, I continued, opening the folder, that medical spa franchise you bought into that went bankrupt within 6 months. Who do you think paid your rent for half a year while you regrouped? How did you? Rebecca started, then stopped. I'm 74, not stupid, I said simply. I know about all of it. Every emergency loan you never repaid. Every favor you forgot to acknowledge. Every time you took my help for granted while planning how you'd spend your inheritance when I'm gone. Owen was staring at his mother and uncle like they were strangers. You guys have been taking money from Grandma while telling me you couldn't help with my textbooks because money was tight. That's different, Rebecca said weakly. We're adults with responsibilities. You're a student. No, Mom, Owen shook his head. I'm a student with a part-time job and a grandmother who taught me the value of earning what you need, unlike some people. Rebecca was crying now, but they were tears of frustration and wounded pride, not remorse. Mother, I apologize if we seemed ungrateful, but you have to understand our position. I'm barely making ends meet. Michael has his own expenses. You can't expect. You both have champagne tastes on beer budgets, I interrupted. And you've been supplementing your lifestyles with my generosity for years while treating me like a burden you can't wait to be rid of. So what now? Michael asked, his voice bitter and defeated. You're cutting us off, choosing Owen over your own children. I'm choosing kindness over entitlement. Owen has never asked me for a single thing, yet when I needed help, he offered everything without hesitation. You've both asked for plenty and offered nothing in return, not even basic human decency. The room fell silent except for Rebecca's sniffling and the ticking of Thomas's old clock on the mantel. Finally, Owen spoke, his voice careful. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Just how much money do you have? And that's when I decided it was time for the second act of my carefully staged production. I smiled at my grandson, this young man who'd proven himself worthy when his own mother and uncle had failed so miserably. Owen, what would you say if I told you that your dear old grandmother won the lottery a month ago? He blinked. I'd say that explains the car. Michael snorted. Mom, be serious. How much could you have won? A few thousand, 10 at most. Try again. Rebecca stopped crying, suddenly laser-focused. What do you mean, try again? I walked to my bookshelf and retrieved the ticket from where I'd hidden it inside Thomas's favorite book of poetry. I handed it to Owen. Read the numbers, sweetheart. Owen looked at the ticket, then at me, then back at the ticket. All color drained from his face. Grandma, these are the winning numbers for the Powerball jackpot from last month. Indeed, I said gently. $187 million, just over $170 million after taxes. Michael lunged for the ticket, but Owen pulled it away protectively. Uncle Mike, don't. Let me see that, Rebecca demanded. The ticket is just a keepsake now, I said calmly. The money has been claimed, invested, and placed in various trusts and accounts. I've spent the last month working with financial advisors, lawyers, and estate planners. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. Michael's mouth was opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Rebecca had cycled from pale to red to pale again in the span of seconds. 170 million, Michael finally whispered. After taxes. Give or take a few million in investment returns, I said, unable to hide my satisfaction. The stock market has been quite friendly this month. Rebecca found her voice first. Mom, we had no idea when you called asking for help. If you'd known I was rich, you would have helped me. I shook my head slowly. Rebecca, do you hear yourself? You would have helped your mother if you knew there was something in it for you. That's not what I meant, isn't it? I turned to Michael. Son, let me ask you something. If I were still living on just my pension and Social Security, barely making ends meet, and I needed help with insulin, would you help me? The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. I see. I sat back down, suddenly feeling the weight of my 74 years. Well, I think this conversation has been illuminating for everyone. Mom, wait. Rebecca's voice was desperate now. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward as a family. Rebecca, 30 minutes ago you told me my problems weren't worth your time. Michael blocked my number. Now you want to talk about family. Owen was still staring at the lottery ticket like it might evaporate. "Grandma, I can't accept this car. Not if I mean this is too much. If you have this kind of money." And that right there was exactly why this young man was about to inherit everything. "Owen, sweetheart," I said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "You offered me everything you had when you thought I needed help. That car isn't charity. It's a thank you gift from someone who can finally afford to say thank you the way she always wanted to." Michael had moved past shock into what could only be described as panic. "Mom, I know we handled this badly, but we're family. Blood. We can work through this. We have to." "Can we?" I looked at him steadily. "Michael, in the months since I won this money, how many times have you called just to check on me? Just to see how I was doing?" They exchanged guilty glances. "We've been busy," Rebecca started. "But Owen called me 4 times," I interrupted. "Just to chat, to tell me about his classes, to ask about my garden, to see if I needed anything. He visited twice. And when I said I needed help, what did you do, Owen?" "I offered to drive down immediately," Owen said quietly, "with my last $600. Meanwhile," I continued, "your mother and uncle, who have helped financially for years, told me to figure it out myself and suggested putting me in a nursing home." Michael ran his hands through his thinning hair. "Okay, yes, we made mistakes. Terrible mistakes, but you have to understand money's been tight. We were stressed. We didn't mean—" "Michael." My voice was sharp enough to cut through his excuses like a hot knife through butter. "Stop. Just stop." I walked to my desk and pulled out a thick manila folder, the result of 3 weeks of work by the private investigator I'd hired. "Do you want to know what I did during these weeks while I was planning my test?" Rebecca went white. Michael took a step backward. "I hired a private investigator. I wanted to know exactly how my children were spending money while claiming to be struggling." "You had us investigated." Michael's voice cracked. "I had my financial situation investigated," I corrected. "When you're worth this kind of money, you want to make sure your assets are protected from people who might take advantage of your generosity." I opened the folder and began reading. "Michael, your monthly expenses include $800 for your golf club membership, $600 for your motorcycle payment, and an average of $1,500 on dining out. Rebecca, your monthly spa visits average $500, your Pilates classes are $300, and you spend about $1,200 on clothes and accessories." "Those are—" Rebecca started. "Meanwhile," I continued, "you've both been claiming financial hardship while living well beyond your means." The private investigator was quite thorough. Owen was staring at his mother and uncle with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "You've been spending thousands on luxury stuff while telling Grandma you couldn't help with insulin." I pulled out a spreadsheet. "Over the past 7 years, I've given or loaned your mother and uncle a combined total of $84,000. Not one penny has been repaid. Not one acknowledgement of the debt exists except in my own records." "We were going to pay you back," Michael protested weakly. "With what money? You're both barely making your minimum credit card payments." I closed the folder and looked at them both. But here's the truly interesting part. The investigator also looked into something else for me. Michael was gripping the back of the sofa so hard his knuckles had turned white. "What else?" "Your conversations about my estate." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Apparently, you've both been quite vocal at family gatherings about how much this apartment might be worth, how my life insurance policy would solve your financial problems, and how it would be, in Rebecca's exact words, such a relief when the old bat finally kicks it and we can split everything." Owen stood up slowly, his face a mask of horror. "Mom, please tell me that's not true." Rebecca's silence was confirmation enough. "But wait," I said, almost cheerfully now, "it gets better." The investigator also discovered that Michael has been telling his friends and colleagues that I'm developing dementia. "Uncle Mike," Owen's voice was anguished. "Apparently," I continued, "you've been laying the groundwork to have me declared mentally incompetent should I ever change my will. There are documented conversations, social media posts, everything." Michael's face crumbled. "Mom, I thought maybe." "And Rebecca," I pressed on, relentless now, "you've been researching guardianship laws. Not out of concern for my well-being, but because you discovered that if I'm declared incompetent, you and Michael could potentially gain control of my assets." "That's not— I never," Rebecca stammered. "I have documentation," I said simply. "Screenshots, recorded conversations, emails. The investigator was extremely thorough. Amazing what technology can do these days." Owen sat down heavily. "I think I'm going to be sick." "The good news," I said to him, "is that your inheritance is completely secure. The bad news for your mother and uncle is that I've taken steps to protect myself and my assets from any future manipulation attempts. What kind of steps? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Well, first, I've been examined by 3 different doctors and 2 psychiatrists. All have declared me completely mentally competent. Those reports are on file with my lawyers, along with detailed video testimonies about my decision-making process and the reasons for my choices. I was rather proud of my thoroughness. Second, I've restructured my entire estate. Owen is now my sole heir. Rebecca made a sound like a wounded animal. And third, I continued, savoring their horror, I've decided to teach you both what it feels like to lose everything. What do you mean? Rebecca asked, though her face suggested she already knew. Your creditors received some very interesting phone calls this morning. All color drained from both their faces so quickly I briefly worried they might actually faint. Mom, what did you do? Michael's voice was barely audible. I paid off all your debts, I said calmly. Michael's motorcycle loan, Rebecca's credit cards, both of your car loans, your personal loans, everything. Rebecca grabbed Michael's arm. Wait, that's good news, right? Mom, thank you, Oh, I didn't pay them off as gifts, dear. I leaned back in my chair, feeling more powerful than I had since Thomas died. I bought all your debts from your creditors, every single one. The implications hit them like a freight train. You can't do this, Michael said desperately. There are laws about predatory lending, family exploitation. Actually, there aren't, I corrected. My lawyers assure me this is completely legal. Unusual, perhaps, but perfectly legal. I purchased legally held debt from legitimate creditors. What does this mean? Owen asked quietly. It means, sweetheart, that your mother and uncle now owe me instead of their various banks and credit card companies. And unlike those institutions, I have very specific feelings about borrowers who called their lender a burden and refused to help when she needed insulin. Much, Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. How much do we owe you? I consulted my paperwork. Michael, your total purchase debt comes to $53,000. Rebecca, yours is $61,000, plus the $84,000 you both borrowed from me over the years that was never repaid. Grand total, Michael owes me $137,000. Rebecca, you owe $145,000. Michael collapsed onto the sofa. Almost $140,000? That's impossible. Plus the new terms I've implemented as your creditor, I added. 25% annual interest compounded monthly. Full balance due in 60 days or I begin legal collection proceedings including wage garnishment and asset seizure. We don't have that kind of money, Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. You know we don't. I know, I said calmly. Michael's savings account has $1,400. Rebecca's has about $900, which brings us to your options. What options? Michael asked desperately. You can liquidate your assets, sell the motorcycle, Michael, that might bring $15,000 if you're lucky. Rebecca, sell your car and buy something economical. Maybe save $10,000. Both of you can pick up second jobs, cut all your luxury expenses, move to cheaper apartments. There has to be another way, Rebecca pleaded. Actually, there is. I smiled sweetly. You can ask family for help. After all, family supports each other, right? That's what you told me I should rely on. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Mom, please, Michael's voice broke. I know we messed up, I know we treated you terribly, but we're your children, we can make this right, give us a chance. Can you? Because I've been waiting years for you to make things right, and instead you've just taken more and more and more. Rebecca suddenly had an idea, her face lighting up with desperate hope. Mom, what if we worked for you? We could manage your properties, handle your finances, take care of your appointments. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Rebecca, sweetheart, you want to work for me? The same daughter who told me my health problems weren't her concern wants to suddenly become my caretaker. Michael was frantically making phone calls now, trying to reach anyone who might lend them money. I watched him with detached interest, like observing an ant farm. Michael, who are you calling? I asked during a pause. Everyone I can think of. Friends, distant relatives, people from work, anyone who might help. And what are you telling them? He paused, realizing the trap, that we need financial help. Just like I needed help with my insulin, I said softly. I wonder how many of them will tell you to figure it out yourselves. Owen had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he spoke up, his voice filled with pain. Mom, Uncle Mike, why don't you just apologize? Really apologize, not just say sorry because you got caught. Michael stopped dialing and looked at his nephew. We are sorry, Owen, we both are. Sorry for what specifically? I asked. I want to hear you say it, all of it. The words came slowly, painfully, like pulling teeth without anesthesia. "We're sorry for not helping you when you asked," Michael began. "For taking your money over the years without paying it back. For saying terrible things about you behind your back." "Keep going," I prompted. Rebecca took over, her voice breaking. "For discussing how much easier our lives would be when you died. For researching how to have you declared incompetent so we could control your money. For treating you like a burden instead of our mother." "Very good," I said. "Now, was that so hard? Does this mean you'll forgive us?" Rebecca asked hopefully. "Help us? Help you how? Pay debts you legitimately owe? Why would I do that?" "Because we're family," Michael said desperately. "No," I said firmly. "You're people who share my DNA. Family requires more than biology. It requires love, respect, and basic human decency, all of which you failed to show when it actually mattered." I stood up and walked to my desk one final time, pulling out 3 envelopes. "However, I'm not completely heartless. I've made arrangements for all 3 of you." Michael's head snapped up. "What kind of arrangements?" "Owen," I said, handing him the first envelope, "this contains the deed to this apartment, which is now yours. Also the title to your car, and information about the trust fund I've established that will cover your education through your PhD if you choose, plus a living allowance. You'll never have to worry about money while you're studying." Owen's hands shook as he opened the envelope. "Grandma, this is—" I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it wisely. Say you'll remember that wealth doesn't make you better than others. It just gives you more responsibility to be kind. "I promise," he whispered. I handed Michael and Rebecca their envelopes. "These contain job applications. Michael, there's a position for a line cook at Bernie's Diner, where I work double shifts to pay for your MBA. Minimum wage, but honest work. Rebecca, the night shift at Walmart is hearing stalkers. Also minimum wage." "You want us to work minimum wage jobs?" Rebecca's voice was shrill. "I want you to understand what it feels like to work for every dollar while the people you love treat you like you're worthless," I said simply. "Consider it character building." Michael made one last desperate attempt. "Mom, please, we'll do anything. We'll pay you back every penny. We'll apologize publicly. We'll—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "You'll do those things because you got caught, not because you're genuinely sorry. There's a difference, and I'm old enough to know it." I walked to the window and looked out at the Portland skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle as evening fell. "You know what's truly sad? If you had just shown basic kindness when I asked for help, if you had treated me with even a fraction of the love I showed you your entire lives, none of this would have happened. I would have shared my fortune gladly. We could have been a real family again." "We can start over," Rebecca pleaded. "We can be the family you want us to be." I turned around and looked at these 2 people I'd raised, who'd shared my holidays, who'd taken my love for granted for so long. "No, you can't, because I've finally learned something important. You can't buy love, but you can definitely put a price on greed. And you've both shown me exactly what that price is. Can you imagine realizing your own children see you as a wallet, not a parent?" Owen stood and hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything. For the test, for the lesson, for trusting me." As Michael and Rebecca left my apartment for the last time, Rebecca crying, Michael numb with shock, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete, perfect peace. My grandson had everything he needed for a bright future. My children had learned what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness and generosity for obligation. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable people who take your love. Sometimes. Saying, "No more," is the kindest sentence you'll ever speak. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.